Alright everybody, today we're gonna talk about an exorcism movie.
I'm Damien Karras.
And I'm the devil.
No, not that exorcism movie. The one with Russell Crowe.
Bow to the powers of God Almighty.
Nope, that's The Pope's Exorcist. This is the one where Russell Crowe plays an actor who's playing a priest who ends up getting possessed by a demon in real life. Yeah, that's the one. Which brings us to an important question. If your washed-up actor of a dad suddenly became possessed by an ancient demonic spirit, what would you do? This guy just landed the role of a lifetime, but nobody knows that the real director here is an evil beast from downstairs. And it won't stop until everyone involved is dead. Today we're here to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat your possessed dad in The Exorcism. So this family reunion is about to become their worst nightmare. Late one night at a movie studio somewhere in New York City, an actor is alone exploring the set of his next big film. He's playing the role of a priest in a remake of The Exorcist, codenamed The Georgetown Project, but he's never gonna make it to the red carpet premiere. The man steps out of a fake cab and approaches the front door of the house, running through his lines as he makes his way through the parlor and up to the daughter's bedroom on the top floor. Standing at the foot of the bed, he pretends to cast out an invisible demon and immediately congratulates himself on a job well done. But as he faces the imaginary audience and takes a bow, something terrifying starts to happen. The circuit breaker surges and all of the power in the studio suddenly cuts out, and the door to the bedroom slams shut on its own. He stands there horrified as a woman's voice calls out to him from the other side of the door, mocking him with his mother's lines from the script. All of a sudden, he hears a demonic scream that seems to come from all around him, and a deep red line forms across his throat as he collapses to the floor. It looks like that's a wrap for this guy, making one down with 5 more to go. But everyone knows that the show must go on. And this demon won't stop until it finds the perfect victim. A few days later, this troubled girl, Lee, takes a cab over to her father's apartment. As she enters the lobby, she can already hear him shouting out his lines from his place up on the 5th floor, the same ones that the other actor was practicing when he got killed. The girl lets herself in and finds her father, Tony, practicing in his living room. He's a washed-up actor who hit a rough patch in his career, but he's just been offered a chance to audition for the role of the priest after the last actor's sudden death, and he's banking on it as his last chance to set things right. Okay, Tony here better be careful about what he's getting himself into. This probably seems like his big shot at redemption, but he needs to watch out before he ends up like the last guy, and brings a whole new meaning to choking on his lines. They might think that they're just filming yet another remake that nobody asked for, but from what happened to the first actor, there's definitely something supernatural already going on here in the real world. The mimicking of people's voices, electronics randomly shorting out on set, and of course being force choked to death are all telltale warning signs of demonic activity. They do this because they have more power over the human spirit if they can make you feel afraid, which clearly worked on the actor here. What's interesting is that we might even already know specifically which demon that we're dealing with, and that could be important in the future. While reading through his lines, the actor specifically mentioned the demon Moloch as the main enemy of the film. Moloch is a supernatural being who was once worshipped as an ancient god, but later reclassified as one of the princes of hell in medieval demonology. He appears as a humanoid figure with the head of a bull, which is meant to symbolize his power and dominance. The scariest thing about him is his preferred victims. Without getting too deep into it, let's just say that his favorite thing to eat is a kid's meal, and I'm not talking about the kind that comes with a toy, which could end up being a big problem for Lee here if Tony starts to fall under his influence. This brings us to the star of our show, our struggling dad Tony here. He might not know exactly what happened to the last guy who had his role, but like we said before, he needs to be careful what he's getting into. The acting world is full of superstitions, and one of those is that it could be bad luck to take the role of another actor after they died during the production. Of course, he doesn't realize just how dangerous things are yet, but I'd suggest doing some personal investigation into the history of the film here and seeing if there have been any unusual accidents involving cast members, especially when it comes to the circumstances of the last actor's death. He should also get familiar with the real beliefs around demonic possession. That way, he'll know what to watch out for if anything starts to happen strange. Just to be safe, I'd make sure to never be on set alone and try to stay in view of others whenever I I could. He should also consider bringing some kind of spiritual protection, like carrying a crucifix or other protective items. And definitely stay sober so that he'll have a clear mind in case of trouble. One morning, Tony decides to go to the church and confess his sins in preparation for the role. Speaking to the priest, he admits that he let his struggles with addiction destroy his family's life and his own career. When his wife was diagnosed with cancer, he used it as an excuse to let himself go all the way off the deep end, and has never been able to forgive himself for it since. Although he only got the new job because of someone else's loss, he's hoping that this might finally be his chance to turn his life around and prove to his daughter that he's strong enough to be a good example. That night while they're having dinner, Lee notices the script and comments to her dad that he isn't exactly the best fit to be playing a priest. She can tell that he's been having some trouble remembering his lines, which he suspects could be a side effect of the new medication that he's taking. The next day, Tony heads over to the studio for his audition. As he begins to stumble over his words, the director tells him to take a break and just talk casually with him for a minute, which Tony takes as a sign that he's not exactly nailing the part. The director asks him what's been on his mind, digging into Tony's personal history as a way to bring out some more emotion for the scene. He starts out with things that are public knowledge, like his addiction troubles and the death of his wife. But things change when he brings up Tony's history as an altar boy. It seems like there was a scandal involving some abuse at Tony's old church, and what they did to him made him turn away from religion for the rest of his life. Thinking about this hits Tony hard, and he decides to throw in the towel, apologizing to the director for taking up his time. But as he's about to leave, the man asks Tony if he can remember the words from Mass. Even though it's been a while, he's able to recite the words from memory, and the emotion in his delivery ends up scoring him the part. But the truth is that this is the last role that he should ever want to take. Tony decides to host a big party at his apartment to celebrate his landing the role, where the director introduces him to a priest named Father Connor, who's coming on as one of their advisors during the filming. Seeing the priest brings up bad memories, so Tony quickly excuses himself to get away. He ends up chatting with Joe, the next runner-up for his part, who says that he's a big fan of his movies. It's clear that they still see him as the man that he was during the peak of his career, but Tony still regrets a lot of the things that he did during that time in his life. At some point during the night, Lee walks into her bedroom and finds Blake, the actress who's been playing the possessed girl, tearfully arguing with somebody over the phone. The girl apologizes for barging in on her, and she admits that she knows her from her roles on TV. The two of them quickly become friends and agree to meet up on set the next day, where Tony got her a job as a production assistant to keep her out of trouble. But they have no idea that this shoot is going to turn into a total nightmare. Okay, Tony here hasn't even started filming yet, and you can already tell that this job might turn out to be more than he bargained for. Let's start with this party. We know that Tony here is a recovering addict who struggled with alcohol and other substances during his earlier career, and has only recently gotten himself back on the right path. He blames these mistakes for literally destroying his life and his relationship with his family, and now it looks like he's about to fall into the same trap all over again. It might seem like no big deal to host a party after landing the role, but literally every person there was consuming alcohol and who knows what else. Even the priest. And the worst part is that they're all obsessed with the person who he was when he was at the lowest point in his life. This could easily tempt him to relapse, since the pressure to participate in the festivities might lead to think him that having just one drink is alright, but that's not necessarily true. Even though he thinks things are under control from his own perspective, the addiction literally rewired the pathways in his brain, so that now even a small amount of alcohol could send him spiraling right down to the place that he was in the years before, destroying his relationship with his daughter and making his health problems 10 times worse. It's especially dangerous now that we know that Tony here is on medication. Since getting clean, he's been taking selective serotonin uptake inhibitors, or SSRI, which are used to treat depression and anxiety disorders. The chemical serotonin functions as a neurotransmitter, which helps send messages between different parts of the brain. It's responsible for regulating your mood, emotions, and sleep schedules. SSRIs increase the availability of serotonin in the brain, improving Tony's mood and emotional stability, but they also come with some potential side effects, including insomnia, short-term memory loss, and trouble concentrating, especially when you add alcohol into the mix. The problem is that alcohol itself is a depressant and counteracts the intended benefits of the medication while intensifying its negative side effects, which could explain some of Tony's actions that we're gonna see in just a little bit. Now, Tony might not realize that he's in danger yet, but all of this is only going to make him more susceptible to demonic possession. You see, demons feed off of negative energy and have much more power over people who've experienced trauma, especially when they're not dealing with it in a healthy way. What makes it even worse is that the director keeps deliberately reminding him of his trauma just to get the best performance out of him. And the people surrounding Tony only see him as a prop for the movie without considering what's really best for him. If he falls back on his old ways, this will break down the only defenses that he still has left, so instead he needs to give up on the booze, go to therapy where he can work through his trauma in a healthy way, and if it all just becomes too much, just retire from acting altogether so that he can focus on his family. This might seem like the big break that he was waiting for, but Tony doesn't realize that he's just signed a literal deal with the devil, and by the time that they're done with the production, he's going to have to pay the price. In the morning, Tony and Lee head down to the set, where there's dozens of crew members already hard at work getting the production started. While Tony is on his way to wardrobe, Lee spots Blake outside of her trailer being blessed with sage. She explains that it's because of the type of movie that they're working on, saying that she's being extra careful since possession movies have a history of weird tragedies happening on set. As they're walking around backstage, an animatronic head suddenly starts to smoke and malfunction, and Blake gives a look as if to say, "I told you so." Up ahead, she brings her to her favorite set, the cold room, where the final bedroom scene is set up in the middle of a huge refrigerated studio. The set itself has a sinister vibe that neither of the girls can pin down, but what they don't know is that this is going to be the place where their worst fears become reality. After getting into costume with the wardrobe team, Tony bumps into Father Connor, and they start some small talk about how things are going so far. Over the course of their conversation, Tony decides to ask the man how he got involved in religion. The father simply replies that he has always looked up to priests as a kid, which is very different from the experience that Tony had, but the man wishes him luck and gives him some privacy to get prepared. Taking a deep breath, Tony looks in the mirror and notices that his nose is suddenly bleeding. He wipes the blood away without thinking much of it, but this is only the first sign that something is going wrong. Later that night, Lee is in her bedroom stalking Blake's Instagram when she hears a loud bang from somewhere in the apartment. When she goes to check it out, she finds Tony's bedroom door locked up tight, but as she turns to check the other rooms, the door slowly creaks open again behind her. Confused, she goes back to the room and looks inside, but there's no sign of Tony anywhere. Turning back to the hallway, that's when she finds him randomly standing like a statue by the door that leads to the staircase. Lee slowly approaches her father, calmly trying to snap him out of it, but as soon as she touches him, he suddenly screams and lunges backward away from her, looking scared to death by whatever the hell just happened. Catching his breath, he actually has the audacity to say that Lee scared him, but they figure that he must just be sleepwalking from all of the pressure, and quietly take him to bed, never realizing that there's a lot more to the story than just normal stress. Okay, things are definitely getting weird, and she might not know it, but the one who's really prepared for what's going on here is Blake. Lee noticed her being blessed with sage before starting the day, and she mentioned that weird stuff tends to happen while shooting these kind of films. But this is more than just a superstition, because there are countless examples of it happening in real life. So during the filming of The Exorcist in 1973, a mysterious fire on set destroyed the entire McNeil house, except for the very rooms in which the exorcism scenes took place. Spooky. 3 years later, in 1976, there were multiple plane crashes on flights involving the cast and crew of The Omen, one of them even killing all of the passengers on board after the crew had switched to another plane at the last minute. These are just a few examples, but the list of weird incidents around exorcism films goes on longer than you might expect. And you just have to wonder, is it all bad luck, or do these films really attract some kind of negative energy? It's only the first day of filming, but we're already getting some signs of some serious demonic activity going around on the set and back at their apartment, as if something has already latched itself onto Tony. First up, we have Tony's sudden nosebleed. This could just be from stress, but if you're paying attention to what happened, you'll notice that his nose started bleeding as soon as he looked in the mirror. Many ancient cultures believed that mirrors were like gateways to alternate realms and could serve as a conduit for a demon to pass through and enter our world. On top of that, when Tony looked into the mirror, he saw a reflection of his own insecurities, breaking down his defenses and making him even more vulnerable to demonic possession. We also see electronics going crazy without any logical explanation. One of the ways that demons interact with our world is by manipulating energy fields, meaning that the electronics around the set and even Lee's phone acting up when they were all back at the house could all be signs of a growing demonic presence. Then we have Tony's sleepwalking and memory loss. These could be a result of stress and the new side effects of the medication, but when you combine that with doors opening on their own and Tony seemingly teleporting around the apartment, it's clearly yet another early warning sign of demonic possession, which means that it might be time for Lee here to start getting worried. They still don't know exactly what's happening yet, but they might be able to get ahead of it now if they act fast. The first thing that Tony should do is speak to his doctor right away and see if the nosebleeds and sleepwalking have anything to do with the new meds. As for Lee, she should make sure that the apartment is secure at night so that he can't just wander off, and keep a close eye on her father before he ends up getting himself into any more trouble. Otherwise, it's time to call in the supernatural experts if things get any worse. But by the time that they realize what's going on here, it's already gonna be too late. On the second day of shooting, Tony is in the middle of filming a crucial scene for his character, but no matter how hard he tries, he just can't seem to nail down the dialogue. The director calls for a cut after Tony flubs yet another line. And feeling frustrated, he asks the man to help him figure out what he isn't getting right. He explains that he's getting the lines right, but what he really wants for him to do is bring out the real emotions behind the words on the page. This still doesn't work, with the director cutting the scene off before Tony can even finish his first sentence, and pulling him aside while he tells the rest of the crew to take a 10-minute break. Frustrated, he starts to scold Tony for holding the whole film back, saying that they'll never get it finished if he isn't able to figure it out. Digging for some inspiration, the director starts to get really personal, bringing up Tony's past trauma again as a way to connect him with the character. But as he gets more and more disrespectful, a dark shadow passes over Tony's eyes. Tony then goes quiet, but the minute that the director walks away, he's almost killed when a stage light crashes down from the ceiling right where he was just standing. Furious, he starts screaming at his assistant to get it fixed. But what none of them realize is that this was no accident, and things are only going to get more dangerous the deeper that Tony gets into his role. Feeling stressed, Tony goes back to his trailer and grabs a beer out of the fridge. But while he's looking for a bottle opener, he accidentally finds a copy of the script belonging to the actor who had the role before him, and a silver crucifix that was tuckered underneath it. Flipping through the pages, he's surprised to see that they're covered in handwritten notes that only get more and more unhinged as the script goes on, and puts the crucifix in his back pocket without thinking that one day it just might save his life. Back at home, Lee finds her father sitting in the corner of her room, staring intensely at a black and white photo of him and his wife at a Hollywood party. Snapping out of it, he apologizes for what went down back on the set, but she plays it off like she didn't even notice, just to make him feel better. They're running through the lines that he's still having trouble remembering, and Lee brings up an old trick that he taught her back during her theater days. He needs to embrace what the lines really mean, and to get all the way into the character, he'll have to wholeheartedly believe in the words that he's saying. It seems like they're on the verge of a breakthrough, but when Tony stands up, he's suddenly overtaken by some kind of mysterious force. Lee notices the change and asks him if he's all right, but he tells her that they should both go to bed, leaving her to clean up the empty beer bottles on the table. While Lee is picking things up, she doesn't notice her father standing at the door staring straight out into the hallway. By the time that she finally catches on that something isn't right, the man has completely disappeared into thin air, with only one of his slippers left in the spot where he was standing. Confused, she walks out to the landing where she can hear Tommy mumbling to himself somewhere in the darkness below. The girl quickly takes out her phone and starts to record him, but ends up dropping it to the bottom of the stairwell, forcing her to go down there and get it back. The lower floors are completely dark, and her father won't answer whenever she calls out to him, leaving the girl terrified as she approaches the bottom of the steps. Grabbing her phone, she turns around only to see him standing there in his birthday suit, and using the corner of the room like a urinal. Suddenly, the lights start to flicker on and off, and when they cut back on again, she realizes that he's now just inches from her face. The girl screams out, completely terrified, but he runs back up to their apartment without causing her any harm. After finally gaining control again, Tony tries to calm himself down with a shower, where he notices that a strange patch of black veins has mysteriously started to form on his shoulder. There's no way you're gonna tell me that they're just going to be chill after experiencing something like that. Like, seriously? Tony here isn't just falling off the wagon anymore, he crashed the damn wagon into a ditch and set it on fire. And they need to get this under control before it goes too far. We've got more strange accidents happening on the set, but this time it's gone from electronics malfunctioning to just straight up trying to kill people. It's no coincidence that the light fell right after the director had deliberately brought up the darkest moment in Tony's life. I think what happened here was that the director broke down his mental barriers, allowing the demon to temporarily take full control over Tony, and the increased power let it go a lot farther with how it manipulates objects on the set. Tony is officially turning back to alcohol, so it's only a matter of time before it's going to send him into a spiral that lets the demon take over permanently. There really should have never been a beer in his trailer in the first place, but there was something else that he found in there that's even more concerning: the script from the last actor. Every single page was covered with demonic writing that got more and more unhinged until he eventually died. Now, this could just mean that he was getting way into the character, but when you consider the bizarre way in which he died, this is a serious red flag. The first thing that I would do is let Father Connor take a look at the script and see what he thinks. They could try to find out more about the actor and if there was anything going on in his personal life that might have caused him to act like this, but if they can't come up with a logical explanation, then that's when it's officially time to start getting worried. In the meantime, Tony needs to be extremely aware of the way that he's feeling and pay very close attention to any strange occurrences that happen from now on, such as the craziness that just went down when they got back to the apartment. Memory loss and casual sleepwalking are one thing, but stripping down to your birthday suit and running around the lobby isn't just creepy, it's a straight up crime. Plus, if Lee was paying attention, it's obviously physically impossible for Tony to have run all the way up 4 stories in just a matter of seconds. They might not realize that he's being influenced by a demonic presence just yet, but clearly the stress of it all is getting to him, and what Tony really needs to do is stop worrying about what's best for his career and start worrying about what's best for himself. He was already going through it mentally, but getting this part has turned things up to 11. With the way things are going, he should definitely consider taking a temporary break from the set while he gets to the root of the issue. He gets overtaken by the demonic presence every time that someone brings up his past trauma. So the obvious solution here is to face those problems and work through them with the help of a therapist instead of immediately trying to move on to a new chapter in his life. More importantly, he needs to see a medical doctor right away for those black veins in his shoulder, because whatever's causing that is definitely not good. The black veins could be a sign of blood clots, inflamed blood vessels, or even a flesh-eating disease, which could all turn fatal if he doesn't get it checked out. And that's only if he's lucky. What would be even worse is if the doctor can't come up with a logical explanation at all, because that's how he'll finally know that he's up against something supernatural. By now, it's the 11th day of the shoot, and the producers are all in a theater playing back some of the recently filmed scenes. Lee walks in to bring them their coffee and overhears the director brutally roasting her dad for his lackluster performance. As she stands in the corner trying to keep it together, Father Connor calls her over to see how she's doing. He knows that being the child of a troubled actor must be tough, and reveals how, besides being a priest, he actually has a degree in psychology from Columbia as well. The man explains that he uses both aspects of his life to help people out when they're going through some tough times. Meanwhile, at their apartment, the demon decides that regular beer just isn't cutting it anymore, and forces Tony to start chugging down whiskey straight out of the bottle. Lee eventually comes home after spending the night out with Blake, and she's so distracted by her phone that she doesn't notice her father sitting there in the darkness. Turning on the lights, she's shocked to see him posted up in the corner of the room like he's in a trance, covered in blood and surrounded by crumpled up pages of the script. She tries to ask him what the hell is going on, but the smell of alcohol makes her think that he's falling back into his old cycles of abuse. Tony tries to insist that there's something else happening here, saying how he can't catch 1 second of sleep without being constantly tormented by visions of her mother. But Lee sees this as him trying to make excuses again, and tearfully warns him that she'll disappear from his life for good if that's what he decides to do. All of a sudden, the apartment door slams shut behind her, and Tony starts walking towards her with a demonic shadow in his eyes, telling his daughter that, like it or not, he's the only person in the world who she has left. Terrified, Lee shouts at him to just get out, but as he goes, it seems like he's been completely transformed into somebody else. 4 days later, Lee nervously goes to visit Tony in his trailer, where he's been boozing it up alone in the darkness. The table in front of him is covered in blood-stained rags from his injuries. Worried about him, Lee sits down to try and get him patched up, but Tony says that it's not her job to take care of him, and begs the girl to go back to school so that she won't have to watch his life slowly fall apart all over again. It's obvious that he only wants what's best for her, even though he can't take care of himself. But Lee here isn't ready to give up on her old man just yet. Getting desperate for answers, Lee takes Blake with her to go visit Father Connor at his church somewhere in the city. She starts off by explaining what's been going on, saying how her father hasn't taken his meds and seems to be walking around in a trance, almost like he's sleepwalking even though he's wide awake. After hearing her out, the priest suggests that the cause might be some kind of repressed trauma that the movie is bringing up. Even though Lee has never spoken to him about it before, the priest says that he'll try to get to the bottom of it while they're on set, which reminds Lee of the encounter several nights back where her father was mumbling to himself in the darkness. And when she plays the recording back for Father Connor, he quickly points out that the man was speaking Latin. Translating for them, he explains that Tony was speaking about the coming of the demon Moloch, who just so happens to be the demon from the movie. Reassuring them, he says that the role is probably getting to his head, but as the girls leave, he breaks out the great big book of demon lore and decides to do some research for himself, clearly thinking that there might be more to the story. Okay, these three really need to start taking the threat here more seriously. I'm sorry, but the signs couldn't be more clear that her dad's possessed if he was crawling on the ceiling and spinning his head around like a Beyblade. What's worse is that the demon is deliberately causing fights with his daughter in order to isolate him and make him easier to control. But they can't even see it because they still haven't accepted the reality of their situation. So Lee walks in on him sitting in complete darkness and looking like he just got into a fight with an invisible tiger. And her reaction is to say, "You know, Pop, you really shouldn't be doing this." Like, yeah, no shit. But when his eyes started to turn black and he started to make the doors close with telekinesis, that's about the time that you start needing to see the bigger picture here, okay? Oh yeah, and they have a recording of him speaking fluent Latin in the middle of the night while running around butt-ass naked. So unless he took Latin in college or something like that, that's like the biggest red flag of demonic possession imaginable. The priest at least seems like he has his suspicions, and I get that he didn't want to freak anyone out, but sending the kids on their way like it was no big deal is borderline dangerous. With the way that things are going here, it's only a matter of time before Tony completely snaps. So they need to start preparing themselves to fight the demon for real. This means that they're going to most likely have to perform a real exorcism, and since they already have a priest nearby, they're already one step ahead. You probably know how the rest of this process works by now. First, he has to get permission from a local bishop. They're going to need proof that he's really possessed, so I'd start documenting anything weird that happens around Tony right away. Once they've gotten the green light, then it's time to hit him with the heavy artillery. No, not the holy hand grenade. Just say the prayers, throw some holy water on him, and hopefully, if everything goes well, you come out at the end with a Tony 100% demon-free. The only problem is that Tony can't see it coming. Otherwise, the demon might try to stop them before they can get it done. They need to catch him by surprise, but it should be easy enough to just ambush him one day when he gets back to his trailer for another brewski. It's safe to expect that he won't be going down without a fight, so I'd bring some rope or handcuffs so that they'll be able to restrain him if he starts levitating onto the air or throwing demonic hands. For weapons, they should stick to the old standbys like a crucifix, some salt, holy water, and get some clothing or jewelry blessed by the priest for some extra protection before starting the battle. It's now the 18th day of the shoot, and they're literally filming the climactic scene where the priest confronts the demon-possessed girl, but once again, Tony here is having some trouble. This time, it's not that he can't remember his lines, it's that he literally can't get them out, as if something's deliberately stopping him every time that he tries to say them. They try going through the scene a few more times, but the director gets frustrated and says something so up to Tony that he decides that it's time to go full demon mode. The director calls action, but instead of saying his lines, Tony puts down his props and starts to walk downstairs. He He seems confused at first, but gets more and more serious as he goes, until he gets to the bottom and faces the crew with the same evil look in his eyes. Turning around, the man suddenly begins to twist his body around at bizarre angles, like he's trying out some new kind of demonic yoga. As he reaches up towards the ceiling, all of the lights in the studio go out at once, but 1 minute later, the man reappears sitting across from them at the library table. Suddenly, he starts furiously headbutting the table like he's in one of those karate competitions, until he finally blacks out. With Tony literally out of the picture, the director decides to bring in the backup actor to take his place, who reluctantly agrees even though he's not completely sure about the idea. While Tony is supposed to be home in bed, the actor stays late on the set to start practicing his lines, when the entire crowd set suddenly goes dark, except for the row of mirrors down by the costumes. Thinking nothing of it, the man puts on his costume and sits down at one of the mirrors. But he has no idea that he's not alone. He starts reciting his lines, leaning in closer and closer to the mirror until absolutely from out of nowhere, Tony explodes through from the other side, before grabbing his neck and snapping it with one hand. That makes 2 down with 4 more to go.
Okay, damn. This poor guy never even saw it coming. This takes falling off the deep end to a whole nother level. And now that he's officially stacking bodies, there's really only one thing left to say, and it's Tony, my boy, you sir have f***ed all the way up. Right from the beginning, you should have been on your guard for paranormal activity after knowing that the last guy who had the part died a mysterious and terrifying death. But no, you had one good thing happen to you in the last 20 years, and you immediately decided to fall right back into your old ways. I won't exactly say that you deserved it, but demonic possession is a two-way street. Most of the time, you kinda have to do some pretty shady or dumb beforehand to get one's attention. And when it comes to you, it looks like the demon doesn't have any shortage of material to work with. As soon as you realized that you were going full demon mode whenever somebody mentioned your trauma, that was probably the time to get some help, don't you think? Maybe you could have put a stop to things before the demon made you do something really crazy. Banging your head on a table and streaking around the apartment are both bad enough on their own, but now you just straight up killed a guy. Who's going to be the #1 suspect after the guy's body is found anyway? Oh, I don't know, maybe the guy who was just playing the role and acting like an absolute psycho? It won't be hard to find evidence either, since you literally headbutted straight through a sheet of glass and choked the guy out with your bare hands. Literally the best case scenario from this point forward is you looking at life in prison, and that's if the demon doesn't take you out first. I've got bad news for you, Tony. It looks like the fall off of your career just became the least of your worries, because you, my friend, have seriously f***ed up.
Later that night, Lee goes to give her father his medication, where she finds the man sitting there in the darkness like a zombie. Blake came by to keep her company, but when she goes back out to the hall, they get the news about what happened to the replacement actor, and it looks like the director has decided to shut the entire movie down. Heartbroken, the two girls go to Lee's room and have their first kiss, but in the other room, her father spits out his medication without them knowing. Just then, they hear a loud crash from her father's room, and Lee rushes in to see what's wrong, shouting for Blake to call for help. She runs over to Tony sitting in a chair, but when she tries to talk to him, he slaps her so hard that it sends her flying halfway across the room. The girls realize that they might need some backup here and rush out of the room. But just when Lee stops to grab the phone, Tony comes charging in, lifting her into the air and body slamming her down onto the kitchen counter. Scrambling for a weapon, Blake grabs the coffee pot off of the stove and blasts him in the side of the head with it, stunning him enough for Lee to get free. Turning towards the open window, he looks back to face the girls before suddenly doing a stage dive right out of the apartment. But when they look out after him, her father has completely disappeared. In the aftermath, Lee meets with Father Connor, telling him that she can still sense where her father is, and they decide that they need to try and save him one last time before it's too late. Along with Blake, the three of them head back to the set, where they know that Tony is waiting. After giving the girls the rundown, Father Connor tells them to wait outside while he goes into the cold room for the final confrontation. But as soon as he does, the door slams shut behind him, and the entire set goes completely black. A single light comes on in a nearby box, and Lee realizes that now she's all alone. Taking it, she looks around the set, begging herself to wake up. But that's when she sees the door to the cold room sitting open. Stepping inside, Lee nervously approaches the bedroom set, noticing a book on exorcism rituals, that slides away when she tries to grab it. She's able to pick it up, but this time when she turns around, she finds her possessed father standing right behind her, and both Blake and Father Connor in a zombified trance to either side. With no other idea what to do, she opens the book to a random page and starts to read the words out loud. But the demon only mocks her, saying that it won't work if she really doesn't believe it. Marching across the room, he grabs Lee by the throat and lifts her up into the air. But that's when she grabs the crucifix out of his pocket, jamming it against his forehead and forcing him to stagger back in pain. The attack releases Blake and Father Connor, but the demon is still too powerful, so the priest tells the girls to wait for the right moment and run. Facing him, the priest challenges the demon to release Tony and take him instead. The challenge works, and Tony collapses to the ground as the demon transfers between them. But whatever the plan was from here, it seems like it's not working out, because the demon looks even more powerful now than it was before. Tony reaches for the book, but it bursts into flames in his hands, and his only choice is to start reciting the prayers from memory. Finally, it looks like Tony here can remember his lines. With some help from the two girls, he begins to cast the demon out, forcing him back onto the bed. There's a moment where it looks like they've won, but that's when the demon jumps back and slaps him to the ground. Grabbing the crucifix, Tony decides that he's had enough and jabs it straight through the top of the guy's skull, before piercing him again a second time up through the chin. With that, the demon bursts into flames and falls to the ground, finally defeated once and for all. In the months after, Lee moves to the West Coast to pursue her dreams of becoming a writer. Tony and his daughter's relationship is the best that it's ever been, and all it took was the deaths of several innocent people to bring them closer together.
The Exorcism. Interesting movie that, Russell Crowe played in 2 movies recently that both have to do with exorcism. But, they shoot these movies out of order, and COVID and editing probably took forever. Who knows? But I'm glad this movie came out, and I had a whole lot of fun covering it. I love these kind of movies, man. They're just so fun to watch. But let me know down in the comments what you would do differently. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out that How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. I'm the guy. I'll see you in the next episode, and have a damn good day.